Welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, daily current affairs analysis. So like every day, today also we have a set of important current affairs topics which are covered in different newspapers, and one by one we'll try to discuss them in a very detailed and in-depth manner so that this discussion will be helpful for your examination. So the first topic with which we are going to start this discussion is about the Russia-Ukraine war and how can the global south can actually secure peace in Ukraine, because it is very important that peace in Ukraine has to be secured. There are multiple reasons for that. One is energy security, other is food security, and there are multiple reasons, because the food security and energy security, they disproportionately impact the countries in the global south, particularly the developing countries and the underdeveloped countries, along with the developed countries as well. So therefore, we all knew that the global south are the countries which are the developing countries. And in fact, on this image you can clearly see that there is a line called Brent line, and this Brent line divides the entire world into the global north and the global south. So what are the features of the global south? So global south has been facing the same or common challenges, because they have the history of colonialism, and they also have the problems like poverty, illiteracy, underdevelopment, lack of infrastructure, higher levels of vulnerability to disasters, and the lack of political stability in these governments. Very often there are military coup or violent takeovers of the governments, terrorism. So there are multiple problems that these countries in the global south have been facing. So compared to the global south, countries in the global north are considered as developed countries, because they have a well maintained infrastructure or good infrastructure, and they also have a good living standards for the people, and they also achieve higher levels of economic growth and economic development. But on the other hand, the countries in the global south are still facing a lot of problems. However, there are countries like China and India which are aiming to secure the leadership of the global south. However, in recent times, India has been playing a very important role to play the role of leader in the global south. So we'll understand how can global south can ensure peace in Ukraine, and how it is going to benefit the world, and most importantly global south. So also remember, India is also part of the global south. So you can see the Brent line here. The countries south of this Brent line are the countries in the global south, and countries which are north of this Brent line are called as the global north. Now, discussing this particular article, we all knew that there has been a prolonged Russia-Ukraine war. So Russia-Ukraine war has created a lot of problems to the entire world. So problems to the food security, problems to the energy security, refugee crisis, violence, arms and weapons mobilization, and it would threaten the entire global peace. So therefore, every country have stakes to address this particular problem, to address this peacefully. So that is what India has stands for. So India wanted to address this Russia-Ukraine war peacefully through diplomatic way, through negotiations. So India never took sides in Russia-Ukraine war. However, India always stands for a peaceful settlement of the issues between both Russia and Ukraine. Now in this context, we'll understand how can countries like India, along with other countries in the global south, can address the problem in Russia and Ukraine. So this particular Ukraine conflict. So we all knew that the Russia-Ukraine war, after Trump elected as the president of USA, is very close to a fragile ceasefire. A ceasefire between both Russian forces as well as Ukraine forces. So therefore, it actually intensifies the debate all around the world about who should actually oversee or who should actually monitor the peace implementation in this particular context, right? So it is very, very important to bring peace to this Russia-Ukraine war. However, the key question or the main question, who should actually oversee the implementation of this ceasefire, so that would result in long-term peace in Ukraine. And in fact, the authors have been emphasizing on the role of the Global South, the credibility of the Global South to oversee this ceasefire or the peace process in Ukraine. And in fact, it is believed that the Global South has all the abilities. The Global South also has the necessary, abilities or capacities to oversee the implementation of ceasefire and also ensuring peace in Ukraine. Now, when I say Global South, countries in Africa, countries in Asia, and even Latin America, so they are emerged as a credible alternative to NATO. So credible alternative to NATO, particularly ensuring the peace process in Ukraine, right? So because there are trust issues with respect to NATO, because Russia don't believe NATO. So NATO overseeing the peace process, so Russia won't below NATO. So that's why it is believed that the Global South has the ability to oversee the implementation of the peace process. Because see, as of now, Global South has not taken any stand on Russia-Ukraine war. Like India, Global South is also largely neutral. So Global South is also largely neutral. And because of this particular reason, it is believed that Global South can become a credible alternative. It can actually become a credible alternative to address the Russia-Ukraine war, particularly to oversee the peace process or implementation of this ceasefire. So I hope you have understood the context. And now we'll understand how can Global South play an effective role to oversee the implementation of this ceasefire, so that it will result in permanent peace in Ukraine, right? So when we talk about the strengths, capacities of all the countries in the Global South, so in fact, Global South is very often synonymous with the developing countries. So it is being synonymous with the developing countries in the south of Brent line. So as I have already told you that developing countries in Latin America, developing countries in Africa, developing countries in Asia, so they are being called as the Global South. And in fact, all these countries have been advocating for equitable global governance. In fact, they stand for equitable global governance. So how this equitable global governance can be ensured, how they are advocating the equitable global governance? Through some organizations such as the BRICS grouping, right? So BRICS regional grouping, and even groupings like Group 77 or G77, right? So these are the groupings which have been emphasizing on equitable global governance. So this is how we can best describe the countries in the Global South, right? So countries in the Global South are the developing countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, particularly South Asia and Southeast Asia. And in fact, most of the countries in the Global South have been advocating for equitable global governance through groupings like BRICS grouping as well as the G77 grouping, right? So we all knew that if we can talk about the BRICS grouping, so BRICS earlier it was a 5-member grouping. So it was a 5-member grouping. I hope you knew those 5 members within BRICS grouping, such as India is a member of it, Brazil is a member of it, South Africa is a member of it, China and Russia. So additionally, what happened was in 2024, 5 more members were added to the BRICS grouping. However, in 2025, again, Indonesia became the member of the BRICS grouping. Right? So what are these 5 more countries which became part of the BRICS grouping in the year 2024? So they are UAE, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Ethiopia. And recently in 2025, Indonesia also became the member of BRICS grouping. So please remember this. This is very, very important for your examination, because previously also question about the BRICS grouping was asked. Now we have understood Global South. Now neutrality. We have already discussed that countries in the Global South are largely neutral when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war. So in Russia-Ukraine war, like India, most of the countries in the Global South are largely neutral. They are neither supporting Russia nor Ukraine in this Russia-Ukraine war, but they are very often demanding to resolve this issue peacefully through diplomacy and negotiations. Right? So in fact, we all knew that Ukraine was backed by Western countries. It was backed by Western countries, particularly the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And in fact, so these countries in the Global South, they neither supported Russia nor supported Ukraine. However, India tried to balance its relations with both Russia as well as Ukraine, and it also did not take sides in the Russia-Ukraine war. It always tried to take a balanced stand, advocating for the peaceful resolution of issues between both Russia and Ukraine. Because one thing that we should understand here is that Russia is also an all-weather ally of India. And in fact, most of the Western countries which are supporting Ukraine are also one of the best friends of India. So that's why India never tried to take any stand. Never tried to take any side in this Russia-Ukraine war, because that could antagonize the other countries with which India so far having good relations. And apart from that, the other aspect when we talk about the credibility of the Global South, to oversee the implementation of ceasefire in Russia-Ukraine war is that, so they have the legacy of sustained UN peacekeeping. So they actually have the legacy of sustained UN peacekeeping, because as of now they contribute for more than 60% of the peacekeepers, right? So there is a United Nations peacekeeping force. So this United Nations peacekeeping force would be deployed to the areas of conflict by the United Nations, particularly United Nations Security Council. So they will be deployed to the areas of conflict, areas of violence, areas of instability. However, more than 60% of the force of United Nations peacekeeping force is contributed by the countries in the Global South alone, right? And in fact, India alone contributing around more than 290,000 troops in 50 plus missions so far, right? So therefore, India is the leader of the Global South, and India is also contributing heavily to the United Nations peacekeeping force as part of the Global South. So this is also another important point that strengthens the credibility of the Global South to oversee the implementation of the peace process in Ukraine. And apart from that, we should also understand the economic and diplomatic clout of these countries in the Global South, because one thing that we should understand is that Global South accounts for around 75% of the global population, right? So 75% of the global population is from these developing countries. And apart from that, 40% of the global GDP, 40% global GDP is from these developing countries. This is in terms of the purchasing power parity. And all these reasons have been indicating that global south has the ability and the capability to oversee the implementation of peace process as well. And the other thing that the global south has been demanding is a multipolar world order. Now, after the end of Second World War, we have seen the bipolar world order. So the world was divided into two different poles, and after the collapse of Soviet Union in 1990s, the world experienced unipolar world order with US as a single superpower. But in recent times, there is a growth of middle powers, particularly from countries in the developing world or the global south. So therefore, global south has been demanding that the world should be a multipolar world. It should not be a bipolar world or a unipolar world. It should be the multipolar world. And global south is also actively challenging the dominance of some Western countries in institutions like International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and they are also demanding reforms in the United Nations Security Council. So because of all these different reasons, the global south can actually play a very important role overseeing the implementation of ceasefire and bringing a lasting peace in Ukraine, right? So apart from that, why the peace efforts that were brought by different parties in Ukraine are failed so far? So we should also understand this. So there are attempts to bring peace in Ukraine, but those attempts were largely failed. So there are some reasons. We'll try to understand those reasons. So in fact, NATO is a North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So it was formed through Washington Treaty, and it is a collective security alliance. It is a collective security alliance, right? So most of the European countries are becoming members of this NATO grouping, and in fact one of the primary reason for Russia invading Ukraine is Ukraine's aspirations to become member of NATO, right? So in fact, even after the fall of Soviet Union, so NATO has further expanded to Russia's borders. And in fact, Russia always felt threatened by the expansion of NATO very close to the Russian borders. So it will be a security threat. And in fact, their sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Russia is threatened by the expansion of NATO, or I would say the mindless expansion of NATO has actually threatened the security, sovereignty, and the territorial integrity of Russia. And in fact, Ukraine is also interested to become part of the NATO grouping. It has expressed its willingness to become part of NATO because Ukraine always believes that there will be a lasting threat from Russia to Ukraine's sovereignty and security, and if Ukraine become part of the NATO, then Ukraine can protect itself from Russia's permanent threat, right? So on the other hand, if Ukraine becomes part of NATO, then NATO will deploy its existing security forces, its existing weapons very close to the Russian border, and that could permanently threaten the security, territorial integrity, and sovereignty of Russia, right? So I hope you have understood this background very briefly. Now, NATO's perceived bias against Russia. So NATO, for example, if there is any effort on the part of NATO to bring peace, so there are suspicions in Russia about NATO's efforts. because NATO is inherently biased against Russia. And in fact, Russia also sees NATO as a threat to its security, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. And because of this particular reason, Russia very often rejects the involvement in peace efforts. So NATO should not involve in the peace efforts between Russia and Ukraine war, and that is the stand of Russia. And in fact, Russia very often call the NATO as the Trojan horse, right? So they are being called as Trojan horse by Russia. And apart from that, there is a lack of trust from Moscow, right? So Moscow never believe the Western countries. Moscow never ready to believe the Western countries, and that's why there is a need for a neutral global South to come in and play a larger role, because global South is largely neutral. Global South is not biased in favor of any country in this Russia-Ukraine war. So that's why it is believed that global South can actually play a very, very important role in overseeing this peace process, right? So apart from that, the domestic opposition in Europe, and within Europe also there are countries like France. So in countries like France, around 70% of the population of France have been opposing the aggressive stance of NATO against Russia, and they are also opposing Europe's involvement in a war against Russia as well, right? So this could be another major problem, that why the earlier peace efforts are being failed, right? So there is the trust deficit which has been existing. And similarly, there is a heavy dependence on US leadership, and European Union also lacks the strategic autonomy to take decisions independently, because European Union is very often dependent on US to take decisions about the European security. But after Trump became the president of United States, there is a ambiguity when it comes to taking decisions on European security, and that also further weakened the long-term peace engagement. And similarly, there are escalation of risks due to stationing of NATO forces very, very close to Russian borders, right? So when NATO forces or NATO troops bordered very close to Russia, then of course it will threaten Russian security, and that makes Russia is not interested to become part of the any peace process, right? So this could even result in the full-scale war between the NATO forces, Russia, or full-scale war between the Ukraine and Russia as well, right? So these are some issues, these are some Ukraine peace matters globally. So there are some reasons because of that Ukraine peace is very important. So first reason is food security, because Ukraine and Russia, so Ukraine's grain exports actually feed around 400 million people, right? So it actually feed over 400 million people, and this war has actually disrupted the key agricultural supply chains, right? So there are some key agricultural supply chains, because see, it is being said that Ukraine has been playing a very important role in ensuring food security. It has been playing a very, very important role in ensuring food security to the entire world, right? So it has also been playing a very, very important role in strengthening or also enhancing the agricultural supply chains, so since it is a global key feeder, because of this Russia-Ukraine war, so what actually happened, there is a disruption to the key agricultural supply chains, and even the energy stability. So energy stability, particularly ongoing conflict that has disrupts European Union gas supplies, and it has caused energy insecurity and even increase in the prices of oil, fossil fuels across the world. And apart from that, nuclear threat also, because NATO it has the nuclear umbrella. And apart from that, Russia is also having a nuclear arsenal. And similarly, there is a shelling near Zaporizhzhia plant, so that actually risks a disaster onto the scale of Chernobyl. So this Zaporizhzhia is also a nuclear power plant. And similarly, the refugee crisis, as over 8 million displaced Ukrainians can Ukrainians strain host countries and European economic systems as well. The global economic spillover because of these war-driven disruptions, right? So there are a lot of such challenges such as nuclear threat, energy security, food security, and even the refugee crisis and inflation problems, and the recession in the global economy. So because of all these reasons, it is very, very important that countries should focus on the peace process. Countries should focus on peace process. However, Russia don't believe the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, right? So therefore, one neutral grouping is that the developing countries, because the developing countries so far neutral to the Russia-Ukraine war, and they never took any stand, right? So any stand in favor of either Ukraine or Russia. So that's why, so if there is any ceasefire for the peace implementation in Russia-Ukraine war, then both the developing countries, including India, can actually play a very, very important role in bringing lasting peace to this particular region. And that would also ensure food security, that would also ensure energy stability, and that would also protect the world from the nuclear threat, and the refugee crisis can also be solved, and it would also bring stability to the global economies as well, right? So that's why peace in Ukraine is very important for the world, right? So we'll understand the role of global south in securing Ukraine peace. So how can the global south can actually play a leading role in securing peace in Ukraine? So in fact, they can play a role of neutral mediator, because we have understood that so far most of these developing countries are neutral. For example, India, Indonesia, and South Africa. So they never took sides in favor of any country in this war. So therefore, since they not aligned with any country, so they can actually play a very, very important role as a neutral mediators. And similarly, United Nations led peacekeeping, such as African Union's peacekeeping in Somalia, Sudan, so that actually proves the readiness of the global south in neutral enforcement of the security forces, ensuring lasting peace in Ukraine. And apart from that, there are some countries who have the expertise in demining and reconstructions. Particularly countries like India and Chile have the expertise in demining and reconstruction, right? So since they have an experience of clearing mines and rebuilding war-hit zones, it is very, very important that the global south can also come in and play a very, very important role as ensuring long-term and lasting peace in Ukraine. And similarly, they could also emphasize on gender inclusive peace building, because India in the year 2007 deployed an all-woman UN peace unit in Liberia, and that sets a model for the inclusive diplomacy as well. And financial and logistical support, because countries like the groupings like BRICS Bank and Global South institutions, BRICS Bank and Global South institutions, so they can actually finance and facilitate the post-war recovery as well. So because of all these inherent advantages, inherent strengths of the countries in the global south, so they are capable countries to play a very, very important role in overseeing the ceasefire and ensuring lasting peace in Ukraine, as well addressing the key global problems as well, right? So the next important topic is a new pattern of remittances. right? So new pattern of remittances, in the sense that what are the remittances. So firstly, we'll try to understand what are these remittances. So remittances actually means that if imagine that you have your family member, and your family member went to any country for work. So he actually doing any job in any other foreign country, and every month he would send a certain amount of money to your family, and that is what is called as remittances in a very, very simple terms, right? So remittance is a transfer of money by a foreign worker to his or her home country to his or her family. So in very, very simple terms, this is what is called as a remittance. However, most of the Indians are working in West Asia or Middle East, and some apart from that, even countries like Europe, and even US, North America, Canada and US also, Indians are working. However, earlier, most of the remittances that India was getting from Middle East, countries in the Middle East and West Asia, such as Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait. So from those countries are also known as the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, and we used to get a huge amount of the remittances from the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. So however, recently what happened was the advanced economies such as countries in Europe and US, even Canada, so those countries have been contributing to the highest share of remittances for India, overtaking the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. So this is the new pattern of remittances, right? So RBI in 23-24 remittances survey has actually revealed that there is a historic shift in the inward remittances. So what is that historic shift in inward remittances? Because India has been getting a huge amount of remittances from the advanced economies in Europe, US and Canada, because they have been contributing more than 50% of India's total remittances. They have been contributing more than 50% of India's total remittances, surpassing the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. Because Gulf Cooperation Council countries, we are getting around 37.9% of the remittances to India. Thereby, the advanced economies actually surpassed the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. So this can become a prelims question for you, right? So compared to the advanced economies, India has been getting more remittances from the Middle East or Central Asia or Gulf Cooperation Council countries. So this statement is wrong, because RBI report has recently revealed that India has been getting more remittances from the advanced economies than the countries in the Middle East, right? So therefore, it has been of RBI's remittance surveys that the dominance of advanced economies, there are certain advanced economies in Europe and USA and even UK. So UK is not part of European Union, right? So UK, US, Singapore, Canada, Australia. So those countries lead in remittance inflow. So particularly from United States, we are getting around 27.7% of the total remittances. So US tops among all the countries from which India has been getting remittances, and even US alone contributes more than the Saudi Arabia, because so Saudi Arabia, we are getting a remittance of 6.7%, and from Kuwait we are getting a remittance of 3.9%, right? So from USA alone we are getting more remittances than Saudi Arabia and Kuwait combined. And similarly, there is a significant decline in the Gulf Cooperation countries contribution, because it has been dropped from 46.7% in the financial year 2016-17 to just 37.9% in 2023-24 as per RBI remittance report. And even if you look at countries like United Arab Emirates, so their share also fell from 26.9% to 19.2%, right? So there are some reasons like job nationalization and policies like Saudiization, right? So they are they are employing their own workforce instead of the foreign workforce. Similarly, the skilled and unskilled remittances are as around 78% of Indian migrants in US are working in high paying sectors such as IT, finance, healthcare, and they are also sending a large sums of money to India. So even student mobility has also another major driving force, because around 13.4 lakh Indian students, in abroad such as Canada, there are 32% of total Indian students, and US alone accounts for 25.3% of students. And once students complete their education and they work as a part-time employee, so they even get the employment opportunities, and again they send remittances to back to India. This is another major reason. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, so when you compare the remittance inflows from West Asia, and also remittance inflows from the advanced economies, so there is more stability in the remittance inflows from the advanced economies compared to the remittances from West Asia, because most of the workers who are working in West Asia, they came back to India during the COVID-19 pandemic and they also become jobless. But on the other hand, in advanced economies, so we actually have the stability of remittances, right? So that's why the advanced economies now overtaken the countries of Gulf Cooperation Council in terms of the total remittances. Now, what are the reasons behind the shift? So there are some reasons behind the shift. So the first reason is the Gulf economic challenges, such as the oil price volatility and nationalization policies that have been adopted by these Gulf countries, particularly UAE's Emiratization, Saudiization, and they have also reduced low skilled jobs for the Indians, and this is the first reason for reduced remittances from the Middle East. The second reason is higher wages in the advanced economies compared to people who are working in Middle East. So if you compare the wages of employees in the Middle East and employees in the Western countries or advanced economies, so wages in advanced economies are much more higher. So I would say 3 times higher than what employees have been getting in Middle East, right? So even the purchasing power parity and stronger currencies such as US dollars and German currency, though, they are also amplifying the remittance values when they come back to India. The third reason is a skilled migration surge, particularly professionals from STEM fields. So STEM is science, technology, engineering and mathematics fields. The migration of professionals from STEM fields and working in countries like US and UK, so they also earn 3 to 5 times higher salaries than the Gulf countries, and this is also another major reason for increased remittances from the advanced economies. And education driven migration, as UK's graduate visa and Canada's PGWP, so they actually attract a large number of students from India, and they later transition to high paying jobs in those respective countries, and they also send a good amount of remittances back to India. And similarly, policy support has been provided through the bilateral policies like India-UK Mobility Partnership and tripled. So this India-UK Mobility Partnership has also tripled Indian migrants to the UK as well. So these are some reasons behind the shift, right? So what will be the implications for India? So there are a number of implications for India. So the main implications include that the increased remittances from countries in advanced economies, so they can actually provide economic stability, because remittances worth the value of 108.7 billion in 2023-24 actually fund 42% of India's trade deficit, thereby reducing the forex pressure in India. So you can even see that India is the country which has been getting the largest amount of the forex reserves in the world. And apart from that, India can also reduce its dependence on Gulf countries, because it actually results in lower exposure to oil driven Gulf recessions and even migrant workers crisis as well. So 2020 Kuwait firings. And similarly, brain drain is a main concern, because most of the people who migrate to these countries in the advanced economies are the professionals in the field of STEM, science, technology, engineering and medicine. So therefore there is a chance, or there's a concern of brain drain, particularly the skilled exodus to advanced economies. So that may deplete the domestic talent in critical sectors like healthcare and technology. And regional disparities, regional disparities in the sense that imagine that there are two states, one is Kerala and the other state is Telangana. So in Telangana, most of the migration to the advanced economies, but from the state of Kerala, most of the migration is to the West Asian economy, right, or Middle East based migration, right? So since most of the migration from Telangana is to advanced economies, so Telangana state would benefit a lot from this migration, because the remittances are also very high compared to the remittances from West Asia, and apart from that their indigenous policies reducing the demand for workforce from India, right? So this may create the regional disparities as well. And digital remittance growth, because as of now UPI and pay now linkage India Singapore, so that actually cuts the transfer cost to around 1%, and this could also boost the inflows as well, right? So these are the main implications on India that India will be facing, right? So we all knew that there is a sixth BIMSTEC meeting, and this sixth BIMSTEC meeting is going to take place in Thailand, right? So it already happened. So in fact Prime Minister Narendra Modi attended the BIMSTEC sixth meeting, and a number of initiatives have been taken in this BIMSTEC summit. So we'll understand what are those initiatives which are actually taken at this BIMSTEC summit. So right, so this is the sixth BIMSTEC summit, and that has been held in Thailand's capital Bangkok, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced a series of India-led initiatives for a regional integration, institutional building, capacity development, even youth skilling as well, right? So when we talk about the BIMSTEC grouping, it is a grouping of 7 countries, and in our previous classes we already discussed about that, right? So it is an institution, a grouping of 7 different member countries, right? So there are some data statistics which have been given about the BRICS grouping. So we'll understand what are the initiatives that India has launched, right? So this is very important. India has launched the Bodhi initiative, right? So a Bodhi initiative that has been launched for the human resources development. So what is the full form of Bodhi initiative? So the full form of Bodhi initiative is BIMSTEC for organized development of human resource infrastructure, and it trains 300 youth annually from the BIMSTEC countries in India. Secondly, under this Bodhi initiative, scholarships for students from the BIMSTEC countries are provided at Nalanda University and even Foreign Research Institute as well. So annual training will be provided for the young diplomats from the region as well, right? So this is the Bodhi initiative and the objectives of Bodhi initiative. And apart from that, India has also announced the BIMSTEC centers of excellence in India, right? So what are those 4 BIMSTEC centers of excellence? One is disaster management, sustainable maritime transport, traditional medicine, and BIMSTEC center of excellence on agriculture research and farmer training as well. However, in the area of digital public infrastructure and fintech integration also, there are some initiatives that are announced by India for regional institutional building and capacity building. So one is a pilot study to assess digital needs of BIMSTEC countries, proposal to link India's UPI with regional payment system for the greater financial inclusion, and for the purpose of economic integration and trade facilitation, so establishment of BIMSTEC Chamber of Commerce, annual BIMSTEC Business Summit, so that will be held in India, and there will be a feasibility study on the local currency trade among the BRICS members, so that they can actually reduce the dependence on foreign currencies like US dollar. And even for the purpose of regional security and space cooperation, so the first ever Home Ministers meeting to be hosted by India annually and nano satellite program, ground stations and remote sensing data sharing, because India already acquired the capability in this regard, and that's why India has launched this initiative, right? So in the area of energy and connectivity, operationalization of BIMSTEC Energy Center in Bengaluru, and there will also be a push for a grid connections to ensure energy security for the BIMSTEC countries. So in the area of youth culture and sports diplomacy, BIMSTEC Young Leaders Summit, hackathon and visitors program will be launched, and hosting of BIMSTEC Athletics Meet in 2025 and BIMSTEC Games in 2027 as well. So BIMSTEC Traditional Music Festival will also promote the cultural ties and cultural integration of all the countries within the BIMSTEC grouping, right? So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much.